Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.
And so I read the account of Lewis and Clark. I did a series of paintings, and then the summer after I finished the paintings, actually drove part of the route on the way to the West Coast, to Portland. And so I have a painting that is the last one of that series at the top part of the wall. I read the Stephen Ambrose account of Lewis and Clark, and starting in the Midwest and going up through the Dakotas and arriving at their destination in Oregon, and all the things that actually occurred while they made this trip. I did a series of paintings illustrating that in my mind, and I was particularly interested in what happened when they got to the prairies and the things that they encountered and things that they did. But when they arrived, and you can see how my mind starts to work, when they arrived in what we now call Oregon, at the mouth of the Columbia River, they spent a very difficult winter. It rained, it was wet, they didn't have proper food and so forth, and so they made friends with Native Americans that were living there and so forth. But as I bring this into my own thinking, as Lewis and Clark went down the Columbia, I have to think about the Columbia River now. The Columbia River has dams, its tributaries have dams. The salmon can't get back to their spawning spots. It's been very difficult. So now there's big discussion about, should we remove dams? What about the clear cutting? How has that affected the streams? Environmentally, a lot of changes are taking place. So as I did the final painting based on Lewis and Clark's trip, and I wasn't illustrating it to go in the book to account for the trip, I did this particular painting. This to me is the mouth of the Columbia going into the Pacific. At the time I was doing this, there was an article in the Seattle paper about the wood that was being purchased from Washington State by Japanese investors and taken to Japan, made into plywood, and brought back and sold to the residents of Washington. So I couldn't help but think about that as I painted this. So I have a salmon, happens to be a sockeye, on dry dock. This salmon did not make it back. As salmon ripen or mature, they tend to change shape and tend to change color. They get very red, and finally they simply disintegrate. And that food of their disintegrating body is eaten by other fish, and they continue to go on. It can't go upstream any longer. It can't spawn upstream where it originated, and it's declining and it's dying. This is the last painting of that series, and I think most people are hesitant to want to own it because it has a dead body in it. It's a dead salmon. I think it illustrates a wonderful event that's going on. I was privileged to see the salmon going upstream to spawn while visiting Vancouver Island, and it's a sight to behold. And so when you find out that the salmon can no longer go and they are no longer as prolific as they were, then it's a sad affair as well. So I have the salmon that can't go upstream any longer and dies. I have a teapot. You'll find teapots in a lot of my work. My mother's family were all Irish, and they drank tea every afternoon, and I remember that as a young boy. And I always thought of it as sort of a time out from work. You just take time out. So the teapot is in a lot of my paintings, and so it's pointing towards Japan. That's how my mind was working here. And then over here we have raw tree branches, and we have lumber. And all that comes together to form, in my mind, what has happened after Lewis and Clark reached the Columbia.
If you enjoyed this segment of Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground, consider making a contribution at lptv.org. If you have segment ideas pertaining to North Central Minnesota, contact us at legacy@lptv.org. Common Ground is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund by the vote of the people on November 4th, 2008.